This podcast is brought to you by On Track Studio.
This podcast addresses various mental health challenges, including topics such as suicide, addiction, eating disorders, depression, and anxiety. These discussions may be triggering for some individuals. If you or someone you know is struggling, please seek support from a mental health professional or a trusted individual in your life. Remember, you are not alone, and help is available. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome back to Mind Your Head. This week, joining me in the studio is Joe Williams. Now, I don't want to give too much away, but this is one of the most important episodes, and you'll have to tune in and find out why. Let's get it. Joe, welcome to Mind Your Head. I really appreciate you making the effort to join me today. I know you're extremely busy, so it does mean a lot to me that you've joined me in the studio today.
It's a different energy when you're with someone in person. I think there's some synergies that we can relate to, and the biggest thing about podcasts now, and they obviously blew up over the last 3 or 4 years, but is it they're so relatable with people, and they're real. That's what I like about them.
It's that authenticity,
That's the biggest thing with anything, right? I've really lent into authenticity and just being real in who you are. And I'm not talking about shooting from the hip or anything like that, but I'm just talking about having to be real, and vulnerability is not just about tears and not just about pain. Being vulnerable is being your authentic self, because we're so guarded.
Absolutely.
By everything. We're conditioned that way, right? Because of different experiences and the world, and how you're conditioned to how I'm conditioned, to very different ways, yeah.
First off, I have to get something off my chest.
Here we go.
Yeah, here we go. Sitting here with you today is a really important moment in my life. And I might get a little bit emotional talking to you about this. We spoke a little bit off air. You asked me why I started the podcast, and I started this a little over a year ago, and a lot of my friends and a lot of my family were like, what motivated you to start the podcast? Why'd you do it? Who inspired you? And for the first time sharing this publicly, you're the reason why I started this podcast. You're the reason why Mind Your Head exists.
Maybe you won't get emotional. Maybe I will hearing that.
I work away in the mines. I think I was telling you before, 12 hours a day. I sit in machinery, which I actually enjoy. Like I actually enjoy that silence and being with my own thoughts, and I never thought I would say that. And about 2 to 3 years ago, I listened to a podcast you did, Straight Talk, I think. And
Mark Burris.
Yeah, and you described your struggles with anxiety, depression, drugs and alcohol, and you put into words exactly how it felt for me. I mean, word for word. And before then, I couldn't articulate it. I couldn't put into words what I was feeling. And for the very first time, I heard it put into words, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And for the first time, I didn't feel alone. For years, I thought something was wrong with me. I thought I was broken and alone. And for the first time, I just felt like there was someone else out there that could relate with me. And to see the ripple effect of this podcast and how it has improved the relationship with my friends, it's improved the relationship with my dad, who I mentioned came on the podcast. It's improved the relationship with my fiancée, who I also had on the podcast. But I think most importantly, it's improved the relationship with myself. I used to hate myself for years. For years, I used to hate myself. And you initiated change in my life to go seek answers and to start that healing process for me. And I know all of this, it wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't for you. So it means the absolute world to me that I have this opportunity to sit here with you and tell you that in person, because you really have changed my life. And I can't thank you enough.
Man, that's cool to hear. Like, you take for granted words. You take for granted the things that you do, and this has been my job, my main job now for 10 years of hundreds and hundreds of communities and thousands of people around the world. And I don't say that lightly, and I don't say it as a big noting moment. But just having, that podcast with Mark Burris, like I checked the views or something on Instagram, and there was like 250,000 views, and just in one conversation. It's funny, like right back in the beginning when I very first started doing this, that was the conversation I heard the most, right? Exactly what you just said. I'd been a footy player. I was then a current boxer. It was I didn't anticipate it to be what it ended up being. There was a short film shot out of Wagga, and I'm thankful that the woman who shot that film had the vision to want to tell that story, because it was a dark story, and whilst I only touched on the surface of what it was at that time, it was a dark story that not a lot of people spoke about way back then, and the biggest thing that came out of that short film, and she asked me, what do you want to call it? And I said, The Enemy Within, because I'd been a professional sportsman for a long time, playing rugby league and then as a boxer. I said, nothing ever compares to the enemy I fight inside my head every single day. And on the back of that conversation, on the back of that film, like, people thought it was, it was shot beautifully, and it was, every the storytelling of it and all that was beautiful. But the amount of people that come to me and said, everything you just spoke about, I go through the exact same thing. I've just never had the words to say it. And how I've described what it is over years has developed and evolved, and with the different knowledge sets that you have, it starts to grow. But right in the beginning, like, the amount of people, and I'm talking like people that were highly respected people in community, people that had never shown vulnerability, people that were the staunchest people that I'd ever met, said, that little voice that talks to you, Joe, I've go through the exact same thing. And I struggle with it daily. And, for a number of years, I used alcohol and drugs to silence what it was. And then, I got sober, 18 odd years ago. And the noise goes sky high once you take all that away. That's when you got to start doing the work on yourself. Instead of, silencing it with substance or relationships or different behaviours, you've got to start to confront it. And that started that journey of me confronting what it was. Whilst it was made very public early on, it just blew up from there. And then, the story of what was originally depression and anxiety to then the rawness of suicide attempts and psych ward stays and the challenges that brought, to then learning about what it is, the narrative of, what this, inverted commas, mental illness is, to then understanding that the behaviours of what mental illness is now is just a product of the early adversities and child trauma that we experience. So who I was then in 2014 and the way that I've developed, I guess the way that I've grown as a person in what I do now, is two very different people. Because now I understand behaviours. I understand, I guess I can be guilty of psychoanalyzing people because I understand where their behaviours come from. I understand that he's got a dad problem. He's got a mum problem. And it's like where it all stems from, and understanding that. And it's not my job to go out and, try and heal or fix everyone. But a lot of the challenges that we have in community today are all a product of the way, the early experiences that we all have in our lives. And I'm not talking about bad ones. I'm talking about stubbing your toe and being left to cry alone, and the manifestation that can build. So, like, when people have got the concept of trauma, they've got it, I can't say they've got it wrong, but the concept of trauma, a lot of people don't quite understand. Gabor Mate talks about it perfectly when he says trauma is not what happens to you, it's what happens inside of you as a result of what happens to you. And as I mentioned, kicking your toe and being left to cry alone, it's not that the toe hurts, it's the hurt that you're left alone with that is the damaging thing. What you did in those moments, you built coping strategies. You built a coping strategy which helped you in that moment. But what happens is those coping strategies are a form of survival, but then they then start to subconsciously wire in and become a form of pushing people out, pushing people away. So that conscious behavior to then protect yourself, which is a survival mechanism, then becomes a maladaptive form that we just push people away when we're actually wired for connection as people. I know stack loads of people that hand up moment, like when I go through challenging times, I just don't want anyone to be around me. Right. And the reason why we do that is because we found comfort at one point in our life, no matter whether it was that moment that you said or a moment where you kicked your toe, we formed comfort in a place of discomfort. So we had no choice but to find comfort in those challenging times. And then those behaviors subconsciously hardwire in, and we're sitting now as a 40-year-old man who pushes everyone away when times are tough. Not because I need to, not because I want to, but because that's what's comfortable for me. Because I found at some very early stage in my life. And those then hardwire in to us being adults who just push everyone away.
33 years old, and at 32 years old, that came to life.
It's bringing the subconscious behaviors to the conscious. And that is some of the most powerful and most important work that we can do. Because there is like a massively high percentage of our behaviors are subconscious behaviors that we aren't aware of. When we start to then make those conscious behaviors or those conscious changes, that's when we begin to rewire the neural pathways that we have. Right? When we're talking about the way we parent, when we're talking about how we are in our relationships, that's just how I am. Well, I don't know if you gathering by your little chuckle, I think you have said that. But that's how I was for a long period of my life. I was just like, I'd get to this point where I'd go, that's just how I am. No, that's not just how we are. We found comfort in a place of discomfort, and then that behaviour started to hardwire in. Right? It's what we need to do is we need to bring those unconscious behaviours to the conscious, because every human being, you, me, everyone, we're all wired for connection. We're all wired to get through things together.
You mentioned a lot in your story just then, and just for my listeners, I'm going to take you back to the start and just tell me a little bit about your childhood, where you grew up, and what challenges you faced when you were a kid growing up.
I loved my childhood. You know, it was country boy, loved footy. I was scared of the city, like buses and trains and all that sort of stuff, like scared the stack out of me. But, so we were just a country family that I guess I was exposed to the racial divide at a very, very early age. Being in a country town, those things are quite prevalent. The old man was a bit of I guess he'll hate me saying this, but a bit of a cult hero within community because of his, footy and fighting abilities. But, both two well-recognised families from a very small country town.
Was he a bit of a leader in the community, was he?
Oh, just the families.
The families were.
Right. Yeah, both families. So mum's family, dad's family, both well known, as in country towns, that's what happens. And dad, there was a number of, siblings. So it was big families, big mob of games of touch footy and softball, we call it rounders back then. So the connection that was there, whilst, as an Aboriginal person, and particularly on the East Coast, we can say that we lost a lot of culture. A lot of culture was taken from us and stolen from us. But the behaviours of culture were still there, as in big family gatherings and doing things in big groups, communal type settings, was always there. And, you know, I was lucky to have that. And, you know, as I said, you know, footy season was always big. You know, I didn't play cricket, so I didn't do anything in the summer, I guess. Yeah. You know, the old man played touch footy, and so we'd go around to different carnivals and stuff like that. Pretty much a footy family of a small town. Older brother and 2 younger sisters that lived with us in the house, but other siblings as well. As I said, I felt that I was loved. I felt that I was looked after. I felt that, you know, there were challenging times, without a doubt. I felt, you know, financially, I remember challenges in our family unit, and that just, I guess, it helped build some, let's call it resilience. Whilst I don't like that word, let's call it, you know, some times where, you know, we found a way. We always found a way, which is something that I'm lucky to be able to carry to this day.
What were you like as a kid at school? I know footy was big for me growing up, and I
went to school to play footy.
Yes, I went to a footy school, so all we did was play footy, and I guess academics wasn't a big part of my life growing up. I
think, from a young age, right, I sold my first deal at 13. Right,
did you?
First scholarship deal at 13.
For the Rabbitohs?
Arthur Beeston. No, for the Roosters.
Oh, for the Roosters.
Don't say that out loud often. The people that I know that are Roosters fans will rub this into me. But I was signed by Arthur Beeston as a 13-year-old kid.
Wow.
Yeah. And, you know, like a...
What a person too.
Oh, yeah. And we had that relationship because Dad lived with Arthur. When Dad played at the Roosters.
Oh, right.
Right, so Dad played at the Roosters, so I lived with Arthur as an 18-month-old kid.
What?
Right. And then Mum and Dad obviously kept in contact with Arthur over a number of years, and then, you know, I get to an age where, you know, we're starting to show some interest, I guess, in some clubs and stuff like that. You know, I was 13. I was 13-year-old. I signed my first scholarship deal with the Roosters. Mum and Dad said, you know, they were like, this is how long we'll sign you for. And I'm like, Mum and Dad said, nah, we're only signing 1 year at a time. Because they said, if you lock this boy up for 5 years, we won't hear from you for 5 years. So we'll do it for 1 year at a time. And then it forces their hand to make sure that you're okay and you're looked after. And if they're not, we go somewhere else. Yeah. So Mum and Dad were really smart in the early days. And I guess what my first few, you know, 1 year contracts was really, really smart with Mum and Dad, where they said, we don't care about money, we don't care about any of that. What we care about is our boy's education. We care about his schooling, and the club who gives him the best educational value is going to get him. Simple. Those first few years paid for my entire schooling. Wow. I remember I was in year 7, and we renewed the contract every year. Which then, you know, as I got to the point of moving to Sydney, was then like a 3-year deal and that sort of stuff from then. So I think year 7 was a 1 year deal, year 8 was a 1 year deal, year 9 was a 1 year deal, and then, you know, 10, 11, 12 was a 3-year deal or something like that.
I think footy for me, from my experiences, especially sort of going through early teens, I think it's when I started to have some inner thoughts, inner voices sort of start to come at that age. And looking back on it now, footy was my distraction. I used it as a mask. I couldn't control my emotions or my thoughts until I stepped on the footy field, and then my head went silent. And it became, not knowingly, but it became an addictive feeling where I was like, I can't wait to play on this Saturday. And I thought it was for a love of footy, and it could be a love of footy, but I think there's an underlining thing that I'd love what footy gave me, that I could just turn my brain off and I could just play on the Saturday and not worry about anything else. What did footy give you?
It's funny, like I told you earlier that I'm, you know, constantly psychoanalyzing different things and people and words that they say. I'm very observant.
Oh no.
But no. It's like it talks directly to the science. Like when you understand it, we go, I'm free when I'm in the footy field. I'm free when I'm in the boxing ring.
My mum would say that to me. She goes, when you were 13, you kept saying to me, she kept asking, why do you love footy? She goes, you kept saying it was free. You felt freedom when you were playing.
And the science behind that is one of the biggest labels that is used now in the wellbeing space is mindfulness. We are present when we're on the footy field because we have to be. If we're thinking about what's going on the sideline, somebody runs clean over the top of it. You know, didn't help me when I was trying to think of what was coming at me. They still run over the top of me. But, you know, I guess, you know, it highlighted even more so when I was boxing because you're so concentrated in the moment of watching what's happening. Where's it? What's he doing with that hand? Where's his foot going? Like, you're in the moment there. Mm. So I really felt it when I started boxing, that freedom around that. But then I guess you go over it a little bit more and you start to analyse it a little bit deeper and you go, that's exactly how it was with footy as well. So it's that, and because I was a halfback, it was like the presence of what are we doing, where are we going, who's where, what's happening, you got to be there, you got to be there, what you know, what we're doing is this, and talking to everyone around what's going on. I guess we can say that we're present, but even more so on the footy field as a halfback, your brain's even busier. Because you're thinking about different things. What tackle is it? Where are we going here? What's the wind doing? Where are we going to kick? What's going to go on? So everything's going a million miles an hour, but you're still present. Everything can be in slow motion. So that's what footy did to me as well. And then you look at the science of that and we go, well, of course I wasn't mentally unwell on the footy field. Well, of course I wasn't mentally unwell when I was boxing in the gym or in the ring. It's because everything was so concentrated on being present in that moment. And that's the beauty of what sport can do. It's that mindfulness. It's being mindful of what's happening. It's being in the present moment. It's concentrating what you're doing in those moments.
When I needed more silence, that I wasn't getting away from footy, when playing footy on a weekend wasn't enough, probably in my early 20s I wasn't a big drinker, but in my early 20s, you know, you get around that footy environment, that's when I turned to drugs and alcohol. When I needed more peace and quiet during the week, that's when I mainly turned to drugs. And it became my coping strategy. I think you mentioned that earlier, that I needed more of it. Like Saturday wasn't enough. I needed it during the week. And that's sort of when my journey began of taking drugs. What's been your journey in navigating drugs and alcohol during that time in your life? Yeah,
you look back at it and for a number of years it was alcohol and drugs silence, what was going on inside my head. But then you go deeper to that, it's just the distraction. Like it takes away the silence because it takes you off on another adventure. And that adventure is not particularly healthy. You know, so we're gonna find coping strategies that are healthy rather than, you know, a form of distraction, really, with alcohol and drugs. So for me, that's exactly what it was as well. You know, we talk about similarities with what it is, and I think it was Gabor again. He talks about addiction, and he says addicts don't get addicted to the substance; they get addicted to the relief that the substance gives them, and that is so true. Like for anyone who's had challenges with alcohol and or other drugs, like it's the relief from the chaos. And that's the only real way that I can probably describe it, the chaos. And for me, also, I guess, you know, in my 18th year of sobriety now, that chaos can be super constructive as well.
Explain.
I wrote my book in a month. I wrote my autobiography, the first manuscript, draft manuscript that I wrote in about 4 weeks.
Wow.
Just because, you know, we talk about bipolar disorder and I'm someone who's diagnosed with bipolar. The extreme highs and the extreme lows. When I'm extremely high, I'm extremely creative. So I've written stage plays. I've written, you know, multiple different books that aren't even published. Kids' books, you know, all sorts of different things. Because I get to this place around my mania and I use it. I use it that is constructive for me, right? So whether it be I'm a muso, right? So some of the greatest times with freedom in my mind is when I'm playing music. So when I was unwell, in 2012 when, you know, my suicide attempt and all of that. When my dad actually found out about it, he came over and we had, you know, some of the deepest discussions that I've ever had. And there's two really important discussions on that weekend. He said, I want to tell you a story about the little boy that lives inside you. And we can go into that in a minute. But the other thing he said, when are you most free? And I said, when I'm playing music and when I'm in the footy field. He said, well, I want you to go out on the footy field tomorrow and have the game of your life. And I was playing music at the time. Like, I stopped working and was playing pub gigs.
How good.
And he said, I want you to go out tonight and play like you're playing in front of 100,000 at Wembley. And there was about 3.5 people in the pub in Dubbo. Playing music and sport was my freedom.
Yeah.
And, you know, I was lucky to I had a career where I played footy and I achieved goals that I wanted to do. I didn't achieve a stack load of goals that I wanted either. And then I boxed for many years, or for years. But the one thing I'd want to do more than all of it is be a music star.
Fuck, we're
too similar.
We're too similar because I've been saying to my mum and dad that I would trade all my rugby skill. I would trade that in a heartbeat to be able to play the piano.
Oh.
And
that's how I started my music journey.
Yeah.
Mum and dad used to get me piano lessons.
Yeah.
And went and bought me a piano and everything, a second-hand piano when we were growing up. And I was, you know, practicing, had lessons every week. And then I turned around and said, I don't want to do it anymore. I just want to play guitar. Because Dad played guitar.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, and uncles and all that sort of stuff. So I always say to people, if you want to play an instrument, play piano first. Yeah. Because once you can play piano, you can play it out. You
mentioned about your creativity in the chaos, and I'm going through my own process now. I've seen a psychiatrist to look at my, my bipolar tendencies. Mm-hmm. I used to think that I had massive highs and massive lows. The lessons that I've and the appointments that I've had, and we're still going through it. Obviously, you know, it's a lengthy process. He's told me that my highs aren't as high as I think they are. My highs are just sort of normal, but it's the lows. My lows are quite low. And Jordan asked me, like, how do you go like structuring the podcast? I go, well, it's sort of like I got some questions, but I kind of want it to free flow. Is how does your creativity go? And it's the same thing with you. Like, there'll be days where I call it like the sun coming through the clouds when I'm just like, the sun's like hitting me and I'm like, all these ideas, I'm on. And I'm like, I can write, boom, 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 I can do 18 pages. And I'm like, fuck yeah, how good's this? And then all of a sudden the clouds will come and I'm like, yeah, I got nothing. We'll try again tomorrow.
Yeah. You know, throughout those processes of, you know, writing my book and things like that, there were those days of what they call writer's block where I couldn't even open my computer. And then there's days where I'm just getting like 2 or 3 hours sleep
because you're writing so much,
and then just because I'm writing,
yeah,
you know. So it's really cool. I'm actually it hasn't been said publicly a great deal, but I'm doing my PhD at the moment.
Oh yeah,
which again, it bounces into my creativity, and you know, I'm doing it very different to how the traditional PhD thesis is.
What are you doing?
Which is on Aboriginal knowledges, Indigenous knowledges.
Oh wow!
Yeah, looking at not what we did, but the impact of what we did on our brain and our bodies. You know, the impact of connection, the impact of song and dance and rhythm and doing things together, and you know, you look at the different practices. How I got to this point, it was funny actually. In 2000, I guess 17, 18, there's a brilliant woman, Auntie Judy Atkinson, Aboriginal lady, big in the trauma space in Australia. And Auntie Judy was like, I want you to go and do this course, Joe. And I was like, oh, you know what? All I'm doing is speaking about my experiences and my lived experience. I don't really need a uni course to do that. And she goes, yeah, but a lot of what you're saying, you actually don't know what you're saying. But you know your content, you know what you're doing, but I think this course will just give you some depth behind what you're doing. And that's paraphrasing, of course. And you know, she said it a lot more eloquently than I just did then. But I went and studied the Indigenous Trauma Recovery Practice graduate certificate, and it just gave me the why behind what was happening and what was going on in not just with me, but in the hundreds of communities that I've been in around the country. It helped me to understand things. And they were like, you've published a book and you've contributed to several other books around the world. Would you consider doing further study? And then, we got to the point where I'm now doing a PhD, and I'm really loving the process of it. It's helping me to understand things so much deeper, understand things so I can help more people in different ways, if that makes sense. It
does, yeah.
So, I'm heading the books at the moment, which is cool. If I get through it, I'll be Dr. Doolittle, Joe Williams.
Can't wait to introduce you as.
Mate, I'm a long way from that yet, but I'm just enjoying the process of what it is.
Yeah.
But in enjoying that process, I'm learning a stack more as well. I'm the sort of person where once you learn something, you can't unsee it.
Have you always been a good learner?
I've always been a good questioner.
Good questioner. Yeah, okay. Not afraid to ask a question.
Yeah, and like in the school setting or school systems, it can be frowned upon a bit. Stop backchatting. And I'm like, why are we doing this? Like, what does this mean? Like, what's the point of this? Even when I was playing footy, and I'd strain a hamstring, and then they'd start massaging my back, and I'm like, why? My hamstring's sore. Why are you looking at my back? And then they're telling you to do ab exercise. I'm like, how is it? Why does all this like connect in with each other? Yeah. So I've always questioned things, and for our practices, for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, right, further back than time can date. And it's a direct, I was telling someone this morning, it's a direct indication of how we are living is the reason why we are so sick. Right? Human beings right now are the most disconnected we've ever been since the beginning of human existence. We move less than we've ever moved. We eat far worse than we've ever eaten. We're disconnected, eat horrible. We don't have relationships with each other. Like parents don't sit down and ask their kids how their day's been anymore. So all of what I've just mentioned is a direct indication of why we're living so chaotically. And then you go deeper to that, like we're spending more time at work than we ever have. We're sleeping less than we ever have. So you look at the impact that has on the young people in our lives. They're out the door earlier than they ever have been. We're spending far less time. When the time that we're spending with them in the morning, we're waking up and we're screaming at them because we're usually stressed because we're all waking up late trying to get out the door.
It's always a hurry.
It's always a hurry. And then we're expecting our kids to have a good day at school when we're screaming at them all day. And then we get home at night and we're working more than we've ever worked. So we're not the usual 9 to 5 anymore. It's like emails are pinging through at 10 and 11 o'clock at night. And if we're not on our emails, we're sitting on social media, doom scrolling anyway. Divorce rates are through the roof. Family separations are through the roof. It's all related.
And it's like when you send your kids are spending more time with the teacher or with daycare or with other kids at school.
There's another book by Gabor Mate called Hold On To Your Kids. Because it essentially talks about how we're outsourcing our kids. Our kids are being raised by their peers. They're learning more off everyone else in their school environment than they are our own parents, and that's problematic.
Has that been scary for you?
Yep.
Has it?
Yeah. As a dad, yeah. As a dad, 100% it has. I always talk about fantastic books. Lost Connections, is that one?
Johan Hari. I was going to bring that up.
Yeah. Right. Johan Hari, and there's another one by Johan Hari, Stolen Focus.
Stolen Focus, yeah.
Right, that one as well. And like those books really changed what I do. And then see, I've got 5 kids. 5 kids from 3 separate relationships that they all got very different versions of me as a dad because of where I was in my life around football, addiction, party life, to then separation, really, really challenging times mentally and emotionally, the healing period. You know, so I've got my two oldest kids that I look back and I go, holy shit. Like, what about how I was then? And then I've got my young middle boy, Rome. I separated with his mum when he was not even 1 year old. And then I've got my two youngest, Frankie and Ari, where I was more or less the sole carer at home during the pandemic because Courtney works as a an essential worker in childcare. So all my parenting styles over 19 years have all been very different. To then I'm looking at and I notice the relationship differences with each individual kid.
Really?
Based on the time and presence I gave those kids.
Wow.
So I can see all that now because I know the science behind all of that now. I know the impact of all of that now. I know why they're pushing me back at me. I know why they won't listen at certain times and certain ages because of brain development and all those sort of things. I know why that people self-sabotage in different situations. It's because it's all got to do with the early challenges that we have in our life. And I'll say this, if there's more money in mental health than there ever has been, there's more awareness in mental health than there ever has been, there's more education in mental health than there ever has been, there's more lived experience and vulnerability and talking about it and all that than there ever has been. The funding around mental health is more than it's ever has been. Programs, awareness, education, all that, more than it's ever has been. But we're dying more and getting diagnosed more. So what we're doing ain't working. So we've got to have a look at our role in all of this and the environments that we're raising our young people in. Kids aren't sicker than ever. The environment is sicker than ever in which we're raising our kids and how we're doing it. I was actually asked a question when I was doing a forum with the MUA, Maritime Unions of Australia. And a guy said, Joe, if you had an endless supply of money to fix everything, what would you do? I said, I'd fund mums and dads to stay home with their kids.
Wow.
Right, because once you understand the importance of secure attachment, everything changes. Divorce rates are higher than ever. Why? Because we've got single parents raising kids that are doing their absolute best, but we come from people, all of us come from people that had multiple caregivers. My people, the oldest people in the world, we had multiple caregivers, multiple grandparents, multiple mothers, multiple fathers.
That's what I've heard you say. It takes a village to raise a child. I've gone away from that, I think.
We don't have a village anymore.
Yeah. I had one of my good friends, his partner came on and she talked about her struggles with postpartum depression. And one of the things was feeling isolated. And she read a book about it, exactly what you spoke about then, is this back when we were in the tribe, it wasn't just her by herself. There was multiple mums or friends and brothers and a whole community and tribe there would have that responsibility to raise a child. And now it's just, you feel more isolated than ever before.
I've seen documentation and seen with my own eyes different experiences of multiple caregivers. When we're talking about breastfeeding and we're talking about how we look after our kids, I've seen it with my own eyes. Like mums are being forced to go back to work because of the cost of living. And there's different challenges around that. And we all know the conversation of that young girl's got daddy problems. It's because dad's never around. Like, attachment for me is the solver. When we have that village of mums and dads and multiple carers in the home, right? And then we understand brain development of when our kids push back against us, mums and dads don't go, oh, hey, I told you to do this, and be the authoritarian. Grandfathers and grandmothers go, oi, leave him. Let me take him. We don't have that anymore.
At all.
So that's why we have the family unit is just so broken and fractured from how it's been forever, right? Aboriginal people are the oldest documented existence of human beings in the world. I reckon they may have a clue in what to do. Yet, we just don't look at it.
Disregard it.
Disregard it, completely disregard it. Going back to my PhD, a lot of what I'll be highlighting is the importance of what our practices were and why they worked.
Yeah. I do want to just go back. You mentioned that you're 18 years sober.
Mm.
Why did you give it up? And how hard was it for you?
Everything in my life that was problematic, and you only notice this 10 years after, right? Everything in my life that was problematic, there was one thing in common.
The drink.
Problems with relationships, problems with footy, form on the footy field, problems with arguments, disagreements, fights. There was one thing in common in all of it. And then I was on the way down to a little place called Yass in country New South Wales for a touch footy knockout, and my mate who was sitting in the back with me, and he was the party guy. He was the man, right? And I hadn't seen him in a while. And I said, "Where have you been?" And he goes, "Just been laying low, just been quiet." I was like, we're going to catch up, we're going to go out, we're going to have a drink. And he goes, "I don't drink anymore." And I'd never heard that before. But everything inside me wanted it. Because I'd never seen it, I'd never felt it, I never experienced it, but everything inside me wanted it. Because I knew, in that moment, I knew that all the challenges that were happening in my life, there was alcohol involved. So we went down the highway, 4 odd hours down to Yass, and we were talking about it, and he sort of, he got inside my head a little bit, and then we roomed together that night, and he said, I said, "That's it. When I go back to Sydney, I'm not going to drink." And he said, "Why don't you stop now?" I just went, I talk about it, a hit fair between the eyes. Yeah. He goes, "Why don't you stop now? You don't have to drink now." I was like, "Just give me one more crack at it." So,
and never looked back.
Give it a red hot shot that night,
yeah,
and then I went back to Sydney, and then that's when I walked into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous that Monday.
Did you? So you got sober while you were still playing footy?
In the height.
Any pushback from any of the players?
No, first it was about me, right? So it was, I knew that I was the first guy there, the last to leave, and the challenges that brings, right? So, in the early days, it was like, come on, it's all right, just have a few, and I'm like, no, I'm not going to, and then.
Because that's our culture, isn't it?
It's the culture.
It's the drinking culture. It's so normalised.
It's not even footy. Footy's drinking culture. It's Australia-wide culture, right? But so what I did was promise myself to remove anything and anyone that would take me down that path. And I think I had some really early wins, as in like I felt good. Like, I felt amazing. Like, I was training better. I was clearer. So I had some early wins, and not everyone's like that, right? So I had some real early wins, and a couple of the guys that were helping me said, just stay, like the longer you stay sober, the better it gets. And I was like, really? Holy shit! Like, this feels great now. Imagine what it's going to be like in 6 months or a year. And then you hear those people go, I'm 2 years sober, I'm 4 years sober, I'm 10 years sober, and you go, I just want that. And they all just kept saying the same message, it gets better. Stay in there, stay in the fight, it gets better. Your tools get better, you get better at managing it. And
is that true?
Yeah, 100%, mate. Without a doubt. Without a doubt. I'd be dead or locked up.
Yeah.
Not because I was a troublesome person, because I was, what's the word for it? I was just messy. Not messy as in those people that fall all over you, and I was annoying. I was that, but I also just wanted something different and something better for my kids. So only my oldest boy has seen me drink. Not that he was old enough to go, "Hey, Dad, you're drinking."
Yeah.
But because I've been sober 18 years, it was a really powerful statement one day. Like kids are like in daycare and childcare and stuff like that. A really powerful conversation because all the kids were talking about what their dad's favourite beer was.
Really?
At a young age, right? At such a young age. They were about 3. And maybe a little bit older. Yeah, 3 or 4, yeah. And Brody, he said, my dad doesn't drink beer, he drinks water. And like those little moments like that.
Feel amazing, wouldn't it?
Yeah, so, Phoenix is 18 this year, and, she hasn't seen me drink. The destruction of what it can bring, just the messy behaviours, inconsistency around being a dad. I don't like that, me. I didn't like that guy. And that's why he drank, because I didn't like who I was.
I mentioned earlier that my coping mechanism was taking drugs, even though I knew it wasn't good for me. But the feeling it gave me was so addictive. And after years and years of this and telling myself that I'd never amount to anything, this is when I was still sort of in my prime of playing footy. One night after coming back from a night out, I didn't want the feeling to stop. I had just broken up with a girlfriend at the time that I was with for 5 years, thinking that was the problem. That's why I'm feeling like this. And once we broke up, she moved overseas, and then I realised that wasn't the problem at all. And like I said, I came back after a night out, didn't want the feeling to stop, didn't care about living or dying. And I remember taking a handful of drugs, and it was like a flip of the coin. Like, I knew that I might not come back from this. Obviously, lucky I'm still here today. I think the aftermath of that was so much guilt, shame, embarrassment. I denied it for a year that I tried to do something like that. Hid it, didn't tell anyone, didn't tell my friends, didn't tell my mum or dad until last year when my dad came on the podcast. I thought it was a great opportunity for him to tell me about his childhood, and I made a promise with him, if you tell me your secrets, I'll tell you mine. So that was the very first time that I told my dad about what had happened. How deep and dark did your inner thoughts and emotions take you?
That's a multi-layered question, because the deep and the dark thoughts were there for many years. Many years. And, speaking to multiple suicide attempt survivors throughout the world, the one common theme that always comes back is, in that moment, I didn't want to die. I just didn't know how else to make the pain end. It's a really challenging time, and even still, 12 years in reflecting in it, or every time I hear about, somebody dying that way, it takes me directly back to that day. When you're sobbing on the shower floor, like almost pulling your hair out, like just wanting the pain to stop. And then that little fleeting thought that has been there hundreds of times, that it pops in your mind and then goes away. But this day it just pops in your mind, it grows and grows and grows and grows, to the point where it convinces you that you don't matter, that you don't belong, that no one cares. So there are people that still, thankfully, these type of people are, be getting less and less because of the awareness and education we have around this space. But anyone who's in that moment is thinking they are doing people a favour, because that's what the mind convinces us.
I thought I was giving them a gift.
Yeah. That's what the mind convinces us. The mind convinces you. It is the biggest liar, because it convinces you that you don't matter, that no one cares, that you don't belong, and that you're better off not here anymore. For me, like, you sit in reflection, and in those moments, you go, if I called any one of the people that are in my phone, anyone, and said, this is how I feel right now, 100% of the time, whilst they'd be shocked, they would want you to still be alive.
I didn't feel like anyone cared, or it was just me. But in reality, I had so much support there. And now that I've been open about it, that all my mates, we talk openly with each other now, that everyone is checking in, because I think asking for help is such a vulnerable thing to do. And I feel like a lot of us, is that, you should, reach out, and if you're struggling, reach out, ask for help. But I think it's so hard to ask for help in those times. It's also
deeper. Like, let's go there as well. It's also deeper than that. Is that this is where I go back to the early years of how we condition people and the subconscious behaviours that are then wired in. Is that so often, way too often, we tell kids that their feelings don't matter. Kids, babies, right? We tell them that their feelings don't matter. Not by saying your feelings don't matter, but by saying, that's all right, that didn't hurt, get on with it. And what that does is tell that baby, my feelings aren't real. So I just build coping strategies to push them down. And then those strategies become hardwired in to the point where when we need vulnerability, we can't. Because of the amount of times that we've silenced or been silenced throughout our lives. So this is why it's so important to validate kids' emotions, people's emotions. Now, I also have to be a little bit protective here as well. Our parents' generation and their parents' generation, that's all they learned. So it's a really challenging concept for the older generations to change what it is, the way that they do things as well. So what we need to do is just to start to encourage, and this isn't a point the finger moment at the older generations, because they just did the best that they could with the tools that they had. So it's about trying to re-educate everyone and different people around the importance of validating someone's emotions, rather than saying, shut up, stop crying. Start saying, come here, what can I do to help?
Has your approach to fatherhood changed? Yeah.
Who I was as a dad 19 years ago to who I am as a dad now.
So different.
Oh.
Yeah.
I'm involved in a documentary that'll be released.
Yeah, I can't wait
next
for
year.
it.
Yeah, it's called Seen. Because, again, we look at attachment, we look at vulnerability and validation as young people in our words.
Speaking of my dad earlier, something that I would love to get your thoughts on. My dad and his siblings suffered a great deal growing up. They were physically and emotionally abused to the point when one of his siblings committed suicide because of the torture that they were subjected to. And that's when Dad came on the podcast and told me about his upbringing and how horrific it was. He said, I asked him, when was the violence and how long did it last in your childhood? And he said, I can't remember a time where there wasn't violence in my childhood by his father, who was an alcoholic. Myself, my brothers, some of my cousins from Dad's siblings' side have all had our own issues with our mental health, whether it be anxiety, some depression, but we've all dealt with something along those lines. Although our childhoods were great and weren't exposed to any of the horrors that our parents were, can trauma still be passed down through generations even though our childhoods were awesome?
Yeah.
It can.
Yeah. And they call it transgenerational trauma or generational trauma, but it's now well documented through what they call epigenetics, genetics and epigenetics. In the most simple form, have you ever caught yourself saying something, doing something, behaving a certain way and go, holy shit, I'm my dad there?
All the time.
That's what it is.
All the time.
That's what it is. How we raise our voices to kids that are this big sets off the stress response system in their brains and puts our kids, our babies on high alert. And we're getting, and even deeper than that, when there's violence in the household, I've got to be careful in how I say this, but when there's violence in the household and mum's pregnant, the stress response in mum's head, in mum's brain, directly alerts the stress response in the baby's brain.
Wow.
And then when we talk about the eggs in which females carry, those eggs have eggs too. So there's 3 generations within one female's body that can directly be impacted by
that stress.
What they're calling those stressful moments.
Wow.
So that's how it's passed down. And those behaviours. So what we're getting now is we're getting kids that are born into high alert, high stress response systems because of the stressful environments that their mums were exposed to whilst they were in the womb. What I also believe is happening is that kids that are born into those situations, like, are then born with almost an addiction to the stress response. That stress response, or that high alerted response, is comfortable for them. So you see in relationships can be going fantastic and then they'll explode, right? And one partner who's been in volatile relationships after volatile relationships, their comfort is the volatility. So that doesn't happen as an adult. That happens when, they're going through stressful environments as they're being raised.
I know a lot of friends that love toxic relationships.
Right, so there's no such thing as a toxic relationship. There is such a thing as a person who is born into a toxic environment.
Right.
That their comfort is when their brain is stressed. So when it's not, when they're in a beautiful relationship, when they're being treated fantastic, that's uncomfortable for them. That's a community. I've got to say this properly. That's when we're getting people who are raised in relationships where comfort is toxic stress. And that's problematic. The great thing to all of this is that this can be rewired.
It can.
It can be.
Sure.
Yeah, it can. Because we are constantly rewiring and building new neural pathways with our connections. So babies are supposed to be held forever. When we have close, intimate attachments, our brain is just rewiring all that. Our brain is constantly evolving in adults.
Yeah.
But we have to consciously make the decision to do it.
We do. We have to be aware of it.
We have to consciously make the decision to do it. Once we are aware, that's when we can change.
Yeah.
When we're not aware, we just flow on with what's been happening always,
I got to 30, and I don't know what happened, if it's the male brain matures at 30, but I got to 30 and I was...
Not far before that.
Yeah. And I became really, really aware of who I am in terms of my triggers. Really, really reactive, almost zero patience. And I remember Jordan saying to me, you don't know how to regulate your own emotions. And for the first time, I was like, fuck, I don't. Like, I just, instead of sitting there and being with it, I would just let my emotions take control of me. I would never think. I would just say things or do things. How do you help regulate or teach that in children?
I was on the Maggie Dent podcast recently, and Maggie asks this question: "What's your household like of a morning with kids?" And when we look at emotional regulation, you look at rhythm and beat, dancing, things like that. So emotional regulation around dance and music. So I wake my kids up of a morning as often as I can with music.
Do you?
Yeah,
love that.
With music and dance.
Yeah,
because my youngest boy, Ari, he's just the world's worst person to wake up of a morning. Yeah,
not a morning person at all.
Oh no, he's just like he's like, oh my God, I'm so tired. But
what's the theory
he
around
won't
music?
go to bed.
Yeah.
He won't go to bed, and we go, mate, you got to go to bed. You got to be tired in the morning. It's it's all right. I'll wake up. And then in the morning,
same cycle. Like,
So you wake up kids with music, because music and beat, so dance, rhythm, all that sort of stuff, helps to regulate emotion.
Is that how they were doing it back thousands of years ago?
What our people did worked. What our people did work for thousands and thousands of years.
Wow.
So my PhD is going to document all of that stuff.
Something that I've chatted to my friends about is something that I think you would have a lot of knowledge around is rites of passage now, especially as men. I think when you become a man, you turn 18.
Get on the piss.
Yeah. Now you're a man. I was 28 and still feel like a kid. I still felt like a child. Is that something we've obviously moved away from? Is that rites of passage and becoming a man?
I think that's it. I think that's also it's a loaded question. Is it something we've moved away from? Well, yeah, it is. It is. But we haven't moved away from it. We've had it taken away from us. And our culture, but it's still there with our culture. It's still there, very much prominent. Yeah, of course it is. It's just that there are many, many parts of our community, unfortunately, that aren't exposed to it. In the difference to the Western world, and I'm only speaking about the experience that you're talking about, get on the piss at 18, right? In difference to the Western philosophy of what that is, our way for thousands of years, you were taught from birth certain lessons, roles and responsibilities. And then it's not like you turn a certain age and then you go on your journey and then you come back a man, because clearly let's say if it was historically around the ages of 12, 13, 14, we look at that in context now and go, well, that's just a kid. But the importance of what our old people did is that when them young people went on their journey, they were taught these roles and responsibilities when they were gone. And it was important for them to live in those responsibilities when they were back. And what's even more important, I think, in my view, what's even more important is that the community viewed them as that. So the community didn't go, hey, you're only a little boy, you don't tell me what to do like that. Because that process worked for thousands of years. How they were viewed when they came back was important as when they went away. Right, so you're right. There isn't a great deal of that now. And the destruction of what that is, very much so, is a big challenge for modern society, particularly in our communities, because it's like we're too white to be black and too black to be white. We don't fit in both worlds, but we also don't have those rite of passage that a lot of people haven't been experienced to. So they don't quite fit. They don't actually know. Now, what you spoke about earlier was you got to the age of 28 and you still felt like a kid. There are so many people who are walking around in adults' bodies with broken little people inside them. That's got nothing to do with rite of passage.
Yep.
That's got everything to do with our environment as kids. And again, not the bad stuff, stubbing our toe and being left alone to cry, crying ourselves to sleep. You remember that? Don't pick them up, you'll spoil them.
Yeah.
You remember that conversation?
Absolutely.
Right? Sleep training, all of that sort of stuff. There are so much that we can learn from old native ways of doing and being throughout the world. I was speaking to a sleep professor at Monash University, and he was talking to an indigenous population. I think it was in South America, and he was talking to them, and he said they were communal sleepers. So they'd have like 30 people sleeping in the one place, and he goes, "What happened if someone wakes up? Doesn't it wake everyone else up?" You know what they said?
What?
What do you mean? No one woke up.
No one.
So he was like, they had no concept of waking up during the night. So he was like,
That was so foreign for him to
so
hear that.
foreign.
Yeah.
So he's like,
No one wakes
what
up.
do you mean? What if you wake up? No one wakes up. But the professor from Monash, he was like, what do you mean? Like you don't? Like I'll wake up every hour. You know?
Yeah.
So that's me personally.
Yeah.
But it talks to, again, when you understand the brain and rapid eye movement in your sleep and those sort of things, you know, when you in a deep sleep and a semi sleep and things like that, you can connect and understand what that is and why that is. It's because we're sitting with television lights all day. We're in front of a computer screen. We've got our phone going mad.
You're on scrolling.
Doom scroll.
Yeah.
Right. We've got all these different things that are going on in our brain, and our brain's just not being quiet. That's why I mentioned earlier around how we sleep less than we ever have before, and you know the challenge of that is because we are scrolling, and that's why lost connections and stolen focus was a good one.
Yeah, it was
for those for documenting that and why it's so important.
You mentioned just before about too black to be white and too white to be black. I've got a really good mate who's Aboriginal who came on the podcast, and two big things that we discussed was him growing up on the sunny coast. He didn't have many Aboriginal mates, wasn't connected to his culture at all. Very good rugby union player, and I'm not too sure if you're familiar with it, the Lloyd McDermott.
Yeah, I know Lloyd as well. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So they got a rugby.
I grew up in that system too.
Oh, right, yes. Yeah. The rugby union program there where they get all the best Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island kids from around the country coming to camp, and he got invited to camp, and all the Aboriginal kids asked him if he's a Murri or a Koori, and he's like, what does that mean? And right there and then he felt so disconnected from his culture, and on the sunny coast he was too black to be white, but what he learnt then was he's too white to be black, and he really, really struggled with his identity as an Aboriginal man, and then also connecting with his culture. He was sort of in that no man's land. How's your journey been connecting with your culture and in your identity?
It's probably been like it was always spoken about strongly. We always knew who we were and where we were from and all of that sort of thing. But again, the Aboriginal practice stuff, the dance and all that stuff, I didn't do as a kid because we were a sporting family. And then I went away and played footy for 10 years
in the
of
city.
my life in the city, where it wasn't at the time celebrated like it is now within the NRL, those systems.
Yeah.
So my journey of connection identity has grown a stack load as an adult, post-career. The last 10 years have been the strongest and biggest growth of me, all my life. And that's because of a lot of that as well has been the work that I've done. And I've been lucky to be around some really special people, to be exposed to some really, really beautiful experiences, and sat around some fire with some beautiful, beautiful old people.
Tell some stories
that just share experiences that that they are special experiences, and you don't take them for granted. But the last 10 years for me has been that. And with our new academy that we've just founded, people say, is it a footy academy, Joe? For listeners, context, I've just founded a new academy called Our Way Academy. And you look at Our Way, it's because we're doing things our way. Like everything's about connection, everything's about identity, everything's about building strong and sound foundations with our identity as young people. because we go away to the city and we're just completely disconnected from anything that we do as Aboriginal people, because that's our job. That's our job, and you got to do your job simple. So I hold a great significance in helping our young people to be the best version of themselves, and I think the best version of themselves is strong in their identity of who they are. And identity, we have to also understand that identity is not particularly just about what you look like. You know, if you're one of those light-skinned black fellas, you know, it's not about what you look like. It's about your behaviours and how you carry yourself with humility and what you do every single day, and learn and live those old stories, them old stories of how the birds got their colours, the old stories of Tiddalik the frog, the old stories of you know, certain mountains and landscapes, because those old stories got the lessons to how we should be living. How the birds got the colours wasn't particularly just a story about birds and colours. It was a story about helping people. Tiddalik the frog is a story about greed and the importance of sharing. So your identity is about your behaviours as well. And I didn't learn that until post my career, because I'm thrust into a world where there's way too much money and there's
a lot of distractions,
too much profile and distraction, and you know, you don't particularly need that.
The other topic that we discussed was his experiences with racism, and this is me being very naive and I guess ignorant, being on the sunny coast. We played footy together, and I remember saying to him, there was no racism when we were playing footy, were we? You know? And he goes, what do you mean? I go, well, I didn't see it when we were playing footy together. He goes, you weren't looking for it.
Yeah.
Your eyes were like this, your tunnel vision. And I was like, what? And he goes, oh, all the time. My parents, you'll be on the sideline, my parents would be getting, you know, remarks and getting spoken to, even just body language. He goes, all my life was like that. And I go, I didn't fucking know that.
Do you remember what I said a minute ago, that our eyes scan every single person?
Yeah.
That's what we're scanning.
Yeah, right.
Is this person looking at me different? Is this person judging me?
He would say that
every day.
These people are giving us that eye, and I'm like, what eye? And he goes, you're not.
Yeah, you don't get it.
You don't get it. Yes, what he said. He goes, you don't get it. And that's okay if you don't get it, but I'm just letting you know.
It's also okay that you don't get it, but it's not okay if you dismiss it. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Because there's a hell of a lot of white fellas out there that just dismiss what it is that we feel. What we feel is very real, and black fellas all over the country will attest exactly to how and what we're saying there, and what your mate's saying as well, is that because they don't get looked at the way we do.
This might be an obvious answer to a question. We talk about like sport and with racism, and you know the publicised with Latrell Mitchell and that little kid, a racial slur to Latrell, and obviously the most publicised one that comes in my head is the Adam Goods situation. And does Australia have a problem with racism, not just in sport but as a country still?
I was asked this on Q&A. I said, is Australia racist? And I said, no, is the NRL racist? He said, does the NRL or the AFL have a problem with racism? And I said, the NRL and the AFL are a byproduct of Australia. People who go and watch the games are the people who are a product of the systems that their parents were brought up in, that didn't tell the truth about our history. So they're going to judge people of colour, and that's why we still have kids that judge people of colour, and we still have the jokes. And
how do we solve it? Is it educational? Because a lot of my friends...
Well, I don't think it's educational, because if you're not educated about racism now, you haven't been paying attention. Simple.
Yeah.
Right? I always say the dinosaurs are dying. Like the old people are dying now. And I've got a hell of a lot of belief in the next generation that are coming through, that are being taught the right things. And you know, you only look at the different wars that happened in Australia, the different massacres that happened in Australia. This place here is a product of, wars and massacres of our people. And there was no social media around then to document it, like there is now in Ukraine and Gaza. The same shit happened here. So people are going to find that uncomfortable to sit with. But our people were poisoned, murdered. There's multiple statues of Governor Phillip and people that were horrific people. There's a statue in Hyde Park in Sydney I'm sure it's Governor Phillip. That there is a quote that he says, paraphrasing here: "Hang the natives from trees to spark fear into the other natives, so they fall in the most conspicuous places to strike fear into the other people." And we got statues of these people
Celebrated.
Like, that's what, when we talk about truth telling, that's what we need to start telling the truth about.
How do we solve it? Tell the
dinosaurs
truth.
are dying.
Is that?
The dinosaurs are dying. They really are. But we need some people to stand up and sit in the discomfort. It also is not about a blame game of you did this 200 years ago to us, because you didn't. But you are holding up the very systems now that are still doing it. When we talk about deaths in custody, recommendation after recommendation that's not being addressed or looked at, inquiry after inquiry, yet these things will still continue to happen.
You mentioned you're a big fan of Gabor Mate. You recently had the pleasure of having an amazing conversation with him. And I'm a big consumer of his content. And he said there are 3 fundamental needs of our children that are crucial for their development, and you've actually touched on a couple of them already. Number 1, they need unconditional love and acceptance from multiple caregivers. They need not to have to work to make that relationship with their parents work. They don't need to be successful, good at school, smart, funny. They just need to be and not worry about wanting their parents to accept them.
It's how people pleasers are born.
They need to feel and experience all the emotions that nature has given him or her, not to be silenced or to be suppressed. What are some key things that you've learnt from him in that conversation you had with him, I think, maybe a month ago?
It's funny, like, I'm very strategic in what I do. Very strategic in what I do. Because people go, wow, that's what Gabor Mate said. And I say, yeah, that's what our people said for thousands of years too. Yeah. Just sounds different when a white man's saying it. The other thing is that white people listen to white people. So I'm very strategic in what I do with those sort of things.
Yeah.
And if it's about, breaking down barriers and walls are put up in certain times around challenging conversations, they really are. And some of my friends have said, Joe, with your approach, non-Indigenous friends, with your approach, you probably should be a little bit more empathetic, because it's, it's triggering for non-Indigenous people. Like, holy shit.
It's triggering for you, is it?
You want to go down
Welcome
that path?
to my world.
You want to go down that path?
Yeah.
But I also understand that you're not going to get the right message across when you're just coming at it with anger.
Yeah.
So you got to be strategic around and articulate around how you do things. I think of every word that comes out of my mouth before I say it. And I think of everything with every conversation. Now, I'm also guided. I know I'm guided by something bigger. So if something comes in my head that's important to say, it'll come there. So, Gabor's exactly right with what he says. And my university lecturer in 2018 was exactly right with what they said. But all of it is just a repetition of how the oldest people in the world lived.
So what he was saying, that's nothing new to you?
No.
You already knew all that?
Yeah. It's just that, again, why we study these types of things is to find out why and look at the science as to why. So then we can go, okay, so when we're in big groups and there was always big, music and dance and all of that sort of stuff when we were younger. That's just a very modern concept of how we did things for thousands of years anyway. Whilst we had, like white fellas always say, "Oh, you mob are all related," because we call a lot of older women auntie and older and uncle, so they go, "Oh, you mob are all related." No. It's just the term of respect, right? But also, we never had first cousin, second cousin, third cousin, fourth cousin. We just had mums, dads, brothers and sisters.
Right.
Because that's the way our kinship systems were for thousands of years. Everybody had a role in community. Everybody fit in community. So that's, it gets down to as complex of, who you can marry and who you can't marry. Things like that.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier that you wrote a book, Defying the Enemy Within, and that's exactly how I would describe my inner thoughts back in my teens and early 20s. What motivated you to write the book, and why was it so important to tell your story?
Yeah, it's funny. I was doing a lot of work in the US with a guy called Kevin Hines. And for those who don't know Kevin's story, it's one that you should probably have a look at. Kevin fortunately has been very few to survive. His stories jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge.
Yeah. I watch a lot of his stuff.
Yeah. So Kevin and I are quite close, and on the back of his documentary Suicide: The Ripple Effect, and I started doing a lot of work with Kevin and his wife Margaret over in the US, and I travelled. I think I've done like 36 states around the US now, and a lot of those, many of those were with Kevin. And everywhere we went, speaking, whether it be conferences, schools, all these different types of things, everyone lined up, purchased Kevin's book to get an autograph for Kevin's book. And I'd always speak before Kevin would speak after, all that sort of stuff. And the amount of people said, "Joe, where's your book?" And I was like, "I don't have a book. What do you mean?" And they're like, "You played that rugby game that, where you don't wear pads, where you don't wear pads." So, and they said, "You should write a book, about your story, about, your rugby league and then your boxing and then the challenges that you have." And I guess it went from writing long Facebook statuses to then blogs to then chapters to then,
I've got a book here.
I've got a book here. Yes, as I said, when I thought I'm going to write a book, it took me about a month to do the first manuscript, or the bulk of the first manuscript. And I was lucky that that was 2019 now, that was published. Due for another one.
Oh, yeah? So you're doing, obviously, you've got the Enemy Within project. What's your purpose there, and what message do you want people to hear?
So I think that's evolved as well, is that in 2016, I was speaking at the World Indigenous Suicide Prevention Conference, and the conversation around the room there was just different. It was like Native people right throughout the world, Indigenous people right throughout the world, were all challenged by the same things, all challenged by high suicide rates. And the conversation was different. It wasn't that it was mental health that was killing our people. It was the flow-on impact and effect of colonisation that was killing our people. Forced to live a certain way after living a certain way for thousands of years. And we spoke about how it was the impact of trauma. So then I started learning as much as I could about trauma. Then going, yeah, well, that's right. Holy shit, this is the product of what we're living. And then there's two other important conversations. One was with an old fella that I hold in high regard called Paul Gordon. And Uncle Paul, we sat down around a fire in Western New South Wales, and he said, "I want to challenge you what those doctors tell you, because I don't believe you're mentally ill." I was like, "What do you mean you don't believe I'm mentally ill? Like, I've been locked up in psych wards and medicated for years." And he said, "You're not mentally ill, you're spiritually ill. You got to heal your spirit to get well." And there was another conversation with a guy called Uncle Paul Callaghan. And those two guys have got a brilliant book called The Dreaming Path. And Uncle Paul Callaghan said, "What you do and learn out here was a certain time and practice that was had significant change in my life. He said, what you do and learn out here, you implement that into the rest of your life, you'll never have mental health problems again. And 10 years down the track, I can honestly say that he's right. And the two of them spoke directly to each other, because one was about the cultural practice and the other one was about my spirit being sick. And the more I did the cultural practice, the more it healed my spirit. So then I started moving towards the conversation of not mental health, but spiritual health, looking at the ways to impact and heal our spirit. And then the product of trauma and, the negative relationships associated with that, and then the relationships associated with healing. So a lot of what I do now with the Enemy Within has been for a lot of years around awareness, education, and just connecting with people and their stories. But then it's evolved into learning and understanding trauma, to then looking and helping people to understand their behaviour, to then now forming Our Way Academy, which is all about utilising the tools that I've learnt over the last 10 years, forming that into the one program to then be able to scale that in different academies throughout the country.
Amazing. And I thought about this. I view you as an artist. I think that you're a communicator. You have this amazing gift and ability to communicate with people. When you talk, people listen.
That's not me. That's the old people, mate. We are oral communicators and have been for thousands of years.
So I was going to say, does that come naturally? But
I was thrust into the limelight going back to the start at a very young age. I had cameras in front of me at the age of 13 because I just signed a new deal. So I had to learn how to talk. I failed every subject at school but music. So I wasn't the world's best academic, but I loved storytelling.
You could tell a story. Yeah. I get that.
So I loved English. I just didn't do well at it. I just didn't listen. So
I've got some quick fire questions.
Yep.
You can answer them as short or as long as you want. How do you define success in your life?
Happy kids.
Happy kids.
Yeah. I don't care about anything else. I don't care about footy, sport, none of that. I just want my kids to know that I love them, that I've at times been challenging, with separations and all that stuff, but I've done my best and I'll continue to learn, and I'll always do what I think is right by them, even though it may not seem it at the time. But every single place that I'm coming from, every single word of advice, even if it lands poorly, I'm always only trying to do my best to help them to understand the best situation that can happen for them.
If pain and difficulty are inevitable parts of the human experience, how do we learn to embrace them?
I don't know if we're going to embrace them. Because I'm a big believer that we're all on this path, and the disappointments that we have is because we get taken off that path. And the disappointments that we have is because we think that our path is going a certain way or a certain direction, or some people are in our lives for a certain time or a certain season or a certain reason. But we get taken away from that, and then breakups happen, and it's just the old people. I believe it's the old people. They're the puppeteers. We're just going to learn to just
go with it.
A sister of mine, I always speak about her, and she always rings me and she goes, "Hey, what are you doing mentioning my name on podcast again?" But Elizabeth Waimara, she said something to me one day. She said, "Joe, our only responsibility that we have to decisions that we make during our life is to hand them over, because something bigger than us is controlling it. When we have our heart set on something and it doesn't go there, we get heartbroken, then we get depressed. And then when we think something's going to happen but it doesn't happen, we get anxious."
Yeah.
Right? So we've got to understand that we're going to go on this path, and everything's going to happen the exact way that it's supposed to happen, at the exact time it's going to happen, on the day that it's meant to happen. So we just got to accept it.
Stop fighting it.
Stop fighting it.
Yeah.
Like, I thought I was going to be a footy player all my life.
Yeah.
Then I thought I was going to Vegas boxing. Then it took me to the absolute depth of darkness to put me on my life's purpose. They say the two most important days of your life are the day you're born and then the day you find out why you're born. For me, I believe I know why I'm here now. And it's a greater purpose than throwing a footy around and getting punched in the head.
Absolutely. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Probably, when my dad told me the story about the little boy that lives inside us, and then, 10 and 12 years down the track, I'm learning about the psychology of the inner child and stuff like that. That's something. My dad's a profound thinker. He's a really, really smart guy. When he told me that story about the little boy that lived inside me, like it's, again, like you touched on it, the little boy that lives inside you. And so I'm just really thankful that I take every advice. I just implement some and not the others. I always give people the time to give me advice. It's up to me whether I take it on board or not. I can't think of anything right now.
That's okay. As I mentioned earlier, I'm not a dad yet, but I would love to look down the road and get some lessons from you as a dad. What lessons did fatherhood teach you about life and how we should be living?
Oh, it's hard as shit.
Hard as shit. I had a mate that was on there a couple of weeks ago, and he goes, I've never felt more love and more anger or pain. He was just like, they make me so angry, but I love them so much.
There's something deeper in that as
well. I think because he's like, remind me of what he was like as a kid. And yeah.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
They trigger him.
They trigger him, yeah.
I think patience. I think patience, and, we can want the absolute best for our kids, and the path is set for them already. It's hard when when your kids are falling short of what they want to do or where they want to go. It's heartbreaking, and all you can do is just guide them the best you can do, the best you can. So yeah, parenting is hard, but what I will say is that I want to be one of those dads, and I think I am in little ways, but I want to be one of those dads where, kids go, shit, I don't want my dad to find out about this. I don't want to be that dad. I want to be the dad where they're in the most trouble and they go, I'm going to ring my dad because you know what? He might have the shits, but he's got my back. So that's the relationship I want to have with my kids. All of my 5 kids are different.
Hello, yeah.
So different. So different. The girls are the bosses.
Hello.
Yeah, they own it, man. They'll be CEOs of companies one day.
Will they?
Oh, mate, they'll boss the shit out of it. Yeah.
Take after you?
Nah, I'll tell you, it's a funny story. The pandemic, really, really highlighted some things for me. I'd always, and I'm mindful of what I say here, but I'd always pointed the finger at my ex-wife, my oldest daughter. Oh, she's so much like a mum. She's so much like a mum. And then my youngest is probably even more challenging, and she's 6. And whilst myself and my ex-wife, there was the separation there, so there was obviously challenges around different things. My partner now is the most gentle thing in the world, the entire world. But my daughter now, Frankie, she's the most fiery thing ever.
Is she? Yeah.
So I'm like, fuck, there's only one thing in common here with both girls. So it's, I just went,
oh shit.
Whoa. And,
wow.
It's funny. I've got a photo on my phone, and she thinks it's her because it's a photo of me as a kid, right? And in that documentary scene, I was talking to the producer Sam, and she has the same with hers, a little picture of her, and it's just a reminder that every day you're triggered, every day you're going through different insecurities or different things. That's who's talking to you.
Yeah.
That little kid.
I love that.
So when I'm going through those different times, I just sit there with that little one. That's all right,
brings
brother.
you back.
I got you back.
The way I speak to myself now has changed dramatically, and I'm happy and confident to say that I love the person that's sitting in front of you. But the work isn't done, and the healing journey still continues, and I think it always will continue. What's the relationship now with yourself?
I had a question recently on a podcast around how do you talk to the little person inside of you now? And I love that. That's exactly what it is. When we're talking to ourselves, we're so critical of ourselves, but what we need to do is flip it a little bit and start to nurture that little person, because the person that's talking back to us is just a hurt version of us. So how do I talk to that person now? I just hold that little fella and just let him know that everything's going to be all right. And everything that I'm responding to now, or the anger that I've got, is just that frustrated little person that didn't have the articulation at the time, for whatever reason or whatever experience it was, to be able to speak back. So I'm really compassionate with that little person now. I'm really loving. And once you start to be loving and compassionate to that little person that lives inside you, you'll notice your entire nervous system change. And, every response that we have with anxiety and depression and those sort of things are a response from that nervous system. So we need to be kind to that, to be able to have a safe and settled nervous system.
That's what my mum used to say to me when I was growing up, was just, she'd give me a hug and she would say, please be kind to yourself. I think she knew how much negative chat, or even when I was playing footy and, I'll get dropped for a team, or people are saying negative things, or I'll be in the paper on the Sunny Coast, they'll say something. And then I'll say, no one's more negative or harsh on myself than me. So what you're saying about me, you should hear the things that I'm saying about me in my head. That's nothing. So my mum would always just give me a hug and say, just please be kind to yourself. I just want to finish on a quote, one of your quotes. If you don't identify and work through your own triggers, your behaviours will spew out all over the ones you love most. The work never stops. Pass down wisdom, not wounds.
It's hard to hear back, man. It's hard to hear back because, we get guilty of that stuff, and we don't realise it. We don't realise it when we're in it because we're all trying to do our best. We just get triggered by different things, and we do spew out the rubbish all over the ones that we love the most. And the ones that I love the most now are the most gentle and kind people that have always had my back. And it's not fair for me to spew my rubbish out onto them. Yeah, we just got to be kind to people and kind to ourselves. The more we're kind to ourselves, the more our behaviours will change to those around us. So it's hard hearing words like that, but if I said it, I've probably got to believe it.
Love it. I have got a closing tradition. I don't ask the last question. I get a family member, a close friend, a loved one. They send in questions for the guest. So I have got your son. Brody goes, can you ask Dad what his favourite childhood memory is?
I'm probably a little bit emotional because whoever got that question off Brody did better than me, because I haven't got anything off him late. It's as I go back to, man, parenting's hard. Dealing with teenagers is hard. What's my favourite childhood memory? Probably, we used to box. Dad was a boxer as well, and we boxed in a little place called in Canowindra. Shout out to Bob and Luke Maitland and the family. And we boxed at Canowindra, right, just outside of Cowra. It was about, I think it's about 20 minutes outside of Cowra. And those trips over to the gym, looking back, yeah, they were special, man, for different reasons. Because boxing just does something different to you. It just does something different to you. I don't encourage people to go out there and get punched in the head by any means, but it just does. The boxing gym is different to a footy team, but they have the same impact on you, if that makes sense. Your boxing team, they've got you. Everyone trains hard and everyone, works hard with each other and encourages each other, and it's just different. And I guess, yeah, the childhood memories, there's a load of them. There's a load of them coming back to me now, but those 25-minute drives, to and from, twice a week or whatever it was, they just build something in you, And what we did in the gym, obviously, boxing as a 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old kid, learning to hold your hands up like it's, you're not fighting or anything. You're just learning different tools.
It's not just a physical thing, isn't it? Like, boxing is so mental.
It's probably more mental.
More mental, yeah.
More mental than it is physical.
Yeah.
There's nights in the sparring gym where you're just on. And then you might box 2 weeks later in the fight and then just can't put them together. And that's just because of the the internal and the external pressures of what it is. And so those memories were good. Anything, playing footy in the backyard with my big brother, they were special. I'm lucky I can remember my childhood. I don't remember a great deal of my 20s for different reasons.
Bit of a blur for me too.
Yeah, so I'm grateful that I've had experiences that have shaped me into who I am now. Some brilliant, some challenging, but they're all every single point of it has shaped me into who I am now. So I'm really, really grateful.
I've got one more for you.
Yeah.
Hey, Dad. I just want to know, what is your favourite ever sporting moment?
So that's obviously from Rome, one of your boys.
I'm a sook, man. What is my greatest ever sporting moment?
He mentioned that it doesn't have to be in the NRL.
I think it's my greatest ever sporting moment is got nothing to do with me. It's got everything to do with just watching my kids. I'm lucky I got to, sport was my job for a long time, But without a doubt, it's, I played with some of the best players in the world, played against some of the best players in the world. Without a doubt, it's watching my kids. The little penny drop moments that my kids go, if they kick a goal, whether it's, Brody playing AFL or Phoenix, scoring tries or with her, footy career. And then Romy's developing into a smart little player. And then the things with Ari, who's not quite there yet, but I can tell that there is some developmental things that are going to be pretty special with him. And then there's Frankie, who had her first year of league tag last year and was terrified to go on the field each week. But then she got the ball and just diced them up and scored this amazing try. And I was like, holy shit, who's that kid, So
it's being that proud parent on the sideline.
Just a dad. All you want to do is see your kids happy more than anything like that. Sport was my job for a long time, man. But it's I'd give it all over for my kids to achieve what they want to do, without a doubt. You realise when you have kids, you realise what's important and what's not. Yeah, that's not diminishing anything I did with sport. Like it's I'm really grateful that I got to do that. But our sole purpose is to leave the world in a better place than we found it for our young people. So I just hope they can take some tools out of how I've raised them to either raise their kids or not raise their kids. You just want to see everyone. You want to see everyone do well and do good.
Joe, thank you so much for joining me in the studio today. I think it means way more than you think it does for me, you being here. And I never thought I would get this opportunity to meet you, let alone sit down and have a conversation with you. It's like I said there, I admire you so much, and you really have changed my life. I want you to know that, and yeah, I can't thank you enough.
It's funny, man. Like I get asked to do these things a lot, and Mel will have a bit of a laugh. You've been, was it you or someone who does it for you, been talking with Mel about getting me up here and all that sort of stuff? As you? So I just go to Mel, fuck, can't he just do it on Skype or something like that? Fuck, why do I got to fly to the Sunshine Coast?
I fucking knew that you would be thinking, why does this kid want me to come up to the coast? And like I said, mate, it was.
I say that with the utmost respect.
Yeah,
I had to
get
though.
It. I had to
get it. Yeah.
Like now, I had to get you up here and I had to tell you to your face, because I would regret it for the rest of my life if I didn't have that opportunity and put time and effort. Just like you made the effort. You were up here a couple of days ago. You're up here again. I knew I would regret it if I
was here 72 hours ago.
Yeah. But I knew I'd regret it for the rest of my life if the sole reason why I started Mind Your Head is because of you. I needed to tell you that to your face.
I'm really thankful to be here. I really am now. And I'm glad that I'm here. That we got to have this, because as I said, being in person, it's a different energy, mate. We probably take it for granted a little bit the impact we have on people, you know. But I'm just as grateful to be here today, to have this, to share these moments, to hear messages from my kids. That's special, man. I've never had that. So I'm just really thankful and grateful to be here, mate, because you're doing a good thing. And if I played a tiniest little bit in that of what that is, then, you know, I'm stoked to be able to do that. But this is your thing now. You know, you grow it and do what you need to do with it, and I'm sure that you'll do good, because this is a beautiful space and a good energy. So I'm really thankful.
Cheers, mate. Appreciate it.